Sarah is a restorative justice specialist with Fairfax County Public Schools. In addition to supporting restorative justice and restorative practices implementation across the school district, Sarah also manages the program data and student-led restorative justice honor councils. Prior to joining FCPS, Sarah was involved in educational and cross-cultural youth-related work as a program manager for a nonprofit and as a teacher in Washington, D.C. She also served on staff for 2 different international youth peacebuilding programs for high school students from the United States, Indonesia, and Central Asian countries. Sarah received her Masters and Bachelors from George Mason University in Conflict Analysis and Resolution, graduating Magna Cum Laude. She is fluent in Mandarin and spent her childhood abroad. I mean, I don't need to say anything, but that sounds so awesome. And with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm so happy to be here today with you all. This has been such a well-organized event. So definitely kudos to all the hard work that kind of put into setting it up. So, the way I'm going to kind of divide the presentation, or it's really supposed to be more of a informal chat today, I'll focus the first 10 minutes talking about restorative justice and what I do in my job and some of the underlying principles and philosophy of restorative justice. And then for the second half, for the last 10 minutes, I'll just talk about my own journey, kind of what led to me wanting to get involved in restorative justice and kind of my own peace journey, if you will. So as was mentioned in my introduction, I'm a restorative justice specialist for Fairfax County Public Schools. And so I'm sure we have a lot of students from FCPS here. And so our team, we're a team of 7, and we basically support schools whenever there's an incident of harm or a disciplinary incident or conflict that occurs in the school community. And we are facilitators. So we will convene everyone involved in the incident, and it can be the person impacted by the harm or the person that caused the harm, and we facilitate a dialogue. And so that is what we call the restorative justice circle. And the dialogue is really intended to help people really talk about what happened, how they've been impacted by what occurred, and to really chart out a plan for moving forward to make things right, or as right as possible, and provide some healing to the community. So that's in a very broad overview of what I do. And I, of course, like with running a program, I also have to do a lot of kind of behind the scenes work in supporting, our program implementation, training, and also data kind of analysis. So I kind of want to talk about restorative justice, because I know maybe some of you know a lot more about restorative justice, but others this might be a new term. Because I know for me, I didn't hear about restorative justice really until my senior year of college. And it's really been something that has, kind of catapulted my interest and really put me on a path that I'm really passionate about now as, someone in the field professionally. So what is restorative justice? So really, in essence, restorative justice is not a program or a department. It's really a philosophy of responding to harm and wrongdoing that really focuses on what the victim needs, and also with holding the offender accountable for what they did and, what harm was caused. So it focuses on accountability and really meeting those most impacted by what occurred. I'm going to be using the terms victim and offender in my talk. We never use these terms when we're actually working with people, but just for the sake of simplicity, I will use the term. Usually we say, for a victim, we say the person that's been harmed. And then for an offender, we'll say the person that caused the harm. But just for the sake of this, I'll use those terms so it's a little bit easier to follow along with. And something to know also is that, obviously with restorative justice, you kind of talk about a lot of hard things. So if anything comes up maybe that is bothering to you, please, reach out to one of us or talk to someone you trust, because restorative justice is dealing with harm and conflict, which is often really tough things to work through and kind of talk about. But so that's really the overarching philosophy of restorative justice. There's 7 principles that really guide everything that we do in this process. So I'm just going to go through them quickly, even though I know it will just be kind of a really the tip of the iceberg. And then I'm going to talk about how this looks more like in practice. So kind of giving the theory behind it and then kind of practical applications. So the first principle of restorative justice is to focus on the harm of wrongdoing more than the rule or law that's been broken. So it's really looking at the root of the harm instead of just like, okay, you broke this rule, you get this consequence. It's really about, okay, why did this harm occur? Or, you know, who has been impacted by this harm and how can we move forward or help individuals move forward from this? Again, we look to empower victims and show equal concern for their needs in the discipline process. So I always use an example, say I'm a student and I get my cell phone stolen from me. I don't get a say in the outcome of what happens to the student who stole my cell phone if it's done in a traditional process. That information is confidential. The school administrator handles it, but they're not actually even allowed to, by confidentiality standards, to tell me what occurs, like what happens in the end of my case. Now with restorative justice, I actually get to be invited into the process for making things right. I get invited, you know, as a stakeholder. I get to share, you know, how I was impacted by having my cell phone stolen, and I actually get to contribute to a plan with everyone else in order to, you know, move forward from this incident. So that might mean, you know, repayment for the cell phone if it was damaged, you know, returning the cell phone. A lot of times if it's, you know, something that involves vandalism or destruction of property, the agreement might involve community service. But as a facilitator in guiding people through this process, we actually don't determine outcomes. So we won't say, okay, you did this, therefore you have to, you know, do this reparation. But we really allow everyone involved to kind of come up with what resolution they feel like they need. And for sometimes, like if it's a conflict, maybe between two friends in a school building, like we will, maybe it's just an apology or an agreement. You know, maybe they wish to continue on in their friendship, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're like, you know, we've kind of, you know, we've resolved this issue, but we'd like to no longer be friends. And so that's what they've agreed upon. And so that's what we'll write down in the agreement, is kind of like resolving the issue. And then the third principle is to also really support students who have harmed others, and really encourage them to take personal responsibility for their actions and understand and accept and carry out those obligations. So again, like, you know, every one of us, I'm sure, has done something that we're not too proud of. And a really big aspect of restorative justice is kind of this belief that we are all more than the worst thing we've ever done. And really kind of honoring and respecting people no matter who they are, no matter what they've done, and really helping them along with everyone else to kind of move forward from what happened in a positive way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, because I know 20 minutes is going to go by really quickly. And actually, Hunter, do you mind letting me know when 10 minutes is up? Because I want to transition to talking about, okay, great. Because I forgot to set a timer for myself. All right, so another thing about this process is it's always voluntary. So we will never force or tell anyone they have to participate in restorative justice. And even honestly, if it's for a discipline incident in a school building, the student who maybe caused the harm still has a choice on whether or not they want to pursue this option over maybe a more traditional discipline option. And that's really important because there's, it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to come into a restorative justice circle. And if someone doesn't feel like they have the capacity or willingness to participate, then that's totally fine. It's definitely not something that should be used for every situation. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about what situations are appropriate versus maybe what situation or what type of situation might be inappropriate for restorative justice. So again, I'm going to hit the next three really quickly. You know, restorative justice seeks to really involve the affected community. So it might be, you know, 2 or 3 students one time, but we also might involve the parents. That's a really big part of what we do. Parents, other family members, community, you know, that might have been affected. So it can be, you know, a very small process or a small circle, or it can be a really large circle with many people involved. You know, we encourage collaboration and reintegration over punishment and isolation. That's really big. And then just for showing respect to all parties involved. So that's kind of our 7 principles that really guide everything that we do. So I have a quick activity really quickly. When you think about justice, what is like some things, like 1 or 2 words that come to mind? So just quickly like put that in the chat if you're able. This is an activity we actually do in our trainings that is really helpful to kind of get a sense of where everyone's at. So if you want to just kind of type 1 or 2 words that you associate with justice, that would be great. So I see equity, equality, compromise, balance, not necessarily privilege. Yes, so oftentimes it's disproportionate. Fairness, equality. Good. So, so here's a question to kind of think about that really kind of guides a lot of our work is, is punishment or is, suspension or, at a really like intense level, imprisonment or incarceration, is that accountability? Because accountability is what you want to reach, is the goal. But just to be thinking about, is punishment accountability? Accountability is defined in Webster's as, an obligation or willingness to accept personal responsibility for what happened and account for one's actions. So to take responsibility and to make things right, or as right as possible. So just be thinking about that as we kind of continue on, because, we are a nation. And I think when we think about, our justice system that is so punitive and so focused on, punishment, we are, in America, we have 7% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. And so I think for me, and I'll kind of start transitioning into my own journey with, getting into the field of restorative justice, it's this aspect of like, do we have a different way of addressing, harm, wrongdoing when it has happened? And so I will kind of, how much more time do I have actually? I'm just curious. 10 minutes? Okay, so I'm right. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of my journey into restorative justice and kind of what led me to, these questions, or like starting to research these kind of system-wide issues, and why I think restorative justice is, can be one part of the solution. So, so I would say I'm going to go back in high school because I know most of you are in high school. I went to high school actually in the Philippines, at an international school there. And I just really, I think in high school, really loved social studies. I loved history. I loved, just all your AP, US history classes and everything like that. And so I thought, oh, okay, I really would want to pursue that. I really wanted to pursue political science in college. And so that's what I initially, kind of wrote down as my major when I went to George Mason University. And I think as I started taking some classes, freshman year, I felt like it was just really removed from like it was talking a lot about like systems and, international relations, which are all super important and no diss towards those majors at all. But I felt like there was a lack of like personal connection for me. And so I started kind of researching some other majors in, at George Mason University. And I came upon this school, which was called the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. It's now renamed the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. And I started researching, and I decided, after meeting with some advisors, to transition and to change my major to peace and conflict resolution. And it was such an amazing decision because in these classes, not only were we learning about, international relations and systems theory, but we were also really learning about how identity contributes to conflict, how even the narratives or the stories we tell generationally contribute to conflict or resolution, how trauma affects people. Like there was just so many aspects. So we were learning from, kind of your, geopolitical level to your interpersonal, relationship with your roommate, or in college, which, lots of times you'll have lots of conflicts with your roommate. So there was just all this like fluid I think, application to what I was learning. And I loved it. I loved it so much. But then I didn't really know like what specific aspect of conflict resolution I wanted to focus on. There was a lot of things I was really passionate about and interested in. And it wasn't until my final capstone course in college. It's called it's like your conflict 490. So it's your last class you take in undergrad. That one of my professors, she really introduced the topic and the concept of restorative justice. And she had us watch this, actually a PBS documentary called Fixing Juvie Justice. And it really was after that I started to see a real like tangible application of like all this theory that I'd learned about conflict resolution into one like process that wasn't mediation. Because again, I felt like mediation, while helpful, a lot of times didn't actually address like the core root causes of what was happening. It was more so helping people, figure things out in order to move forward, but it wasn't really addressing some of the deeper maybe contributors to the conflict. And so 6 minutes. Okay, got it. Thanks. So I decided to write my, senior thesis on restorative justice. And I read every book I could get my hands on restorative justice, and not only looking at juvenile, restorative justice approaches to juvenile offenders, but I started really thinking about and researching how restorative justice could be used in schools to reduce suspensions, to kind of reduce a lot of the punitive discipline policies that really look to like push students out instead of holding students accountable to their actions, but including them still in the community. And so that was really, honestly, like that research project was what kind of set this whole trajectory of my career, because it was through the research that I was doing that I met one of my colleagues that I currently work with in Fairfax County Public Schools, Vicki Shope. She's another specialist, but I interviewed her for a paper and ended up like taking an internship with the office. And then I graduated from my program. I went to, I did a alternative teaching certification program. So I was a teacher for a while, and then also worked at like an educational nonprofit, but really wanted to get back into restorative justice and to, really working, face to face with students and families, and just individuals who were in conflict, and utilizing these skills of restorative justice to really help guide people towards resolution. And so, thankfully I was able to, find a full-time position doing restorative justice work. And so that's what I'm doing now. And I've been doing that for about 2.5 years. And it's been really great. One thing that I really love in the program that I do is working also with like the student honor councils. And this is actually something that you might think about getting involved with at your school if you are within the FCPS network, because you can actually get trained as a student facilitator to become to facilitate circles for like student academic integrity violations. And of course, the school has to, be on board and to, be willing to kind of set this up. But it's a way to also address the harm that is caused when, a student cheats or plagiarizes on their paper. And so that's like a small way that students can be, active facilitators and peace builders that we have through restorative justice in this context. Yeah, so there's just so much to cover, but I wanted to, do I have like 4 more minutes? Okay, and I think we'll have time for questions and answers later, but I wanted to, because I know this is a lot of times just like more of a, a conversation around maybe how to get started in the field or how to pursue your passions and your interests. So I wrote down kind of 3 steps that, or 3 kind of takeaways that, if you are interested in pursuing a, peace studies degree or a job in this field, or any field, but you want to just do this type of work and, impact change. These are some things that, I wrote down. So one is just to, focus on taking one small step. I would say that a lot of the most amazing opportunities I've been able to kind of experience have been by taking just one small step. One thing that I did while I was in college is I mentored a kind of middle school and high school group of girls that lived across from campus from me. And it was like one small step because I really wanted to get involved in just my community. But, you know, I didn't really know where to start, but I just kind of researched and, you know, found this organization that they needed, you know, a facilitator for their kind of, you know, Friday night girls groups. And so I got involved in that and ended up being one of the most amazing experiences that I had. So just don't focus so much on, you know, all the big things that you want to get done or your big goals. Definitely like write those down, but then just think about one small step that you can take. The other is just to really pursue like informational interviews. So maybe you've heard of someone or you know someone that's doing something that's really interesting to you. Definitely reach out to them. I find that people oftentimes are really willing to kind of share about their own journey, their own career, what they studied in college, what mistakes they made, or what they would recommend. And so definitely take advantage of that, especially as you're kind of going into college. But even as a high school student, there's so much that you can learn by just honestly interviewing people. And those connections, you never know where they might lead to. My connection with even doing my research led to, I mean, eventually it was like 5 years later, but a job that I currently have. And so never underestimate that. And then the third thing is just focus on developing as many skills as possible. I think in this field, we sometimes focus a lot on, you know, facilitator skills and a lot of like soft skills, which are super important. But I would also encourage you to focus on other like maybe more hard skills or more technical skills that you can then bring into a job or a organization that might really need someone that, you know, knows coding or, you know, a database. Like a lot of my job is, you know, working with data and analyzing data. And so, you know, I didn't study that in college, so I've had to learn it since then. But all those skills, I mean, you never know what might be something that you can really apply to what you're passionate about. So don't try to pigeonhole yourself and just really learn as much as you can and know that every experience is going to be something that is beneficial for you. So that's kind of my three kind of points. And how much more time do we have? I think we're probably at time. Okay, cool.
Yeah, Sarah, I don't want to interrupt though, but if you have any like last remarks you want to make.
Well, I think you know, one thing I didn't get to touch on that we can touch on a little bit more, but just is also like restorative justice is very much an equity conversation. And I think a lot of times when you look at suspensions across the country and you look at data, it's certain students who are being suspended. It's often the highest percentages are Black and Brown students, are students of color who are being suspended. And so there's a real like racial justice, racial equity aspect to this work. So I didn't get to touch on that as much as I would have liked to, but do keep that in mind, especially as you continue to research.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Wait, I honestly like I feel like there's just so much to talk about, and I think you did an incredible job of like just giving us, you know, that brief draw in that hook to really get us like interested. I think the biggest takeaway for me personally was just like you were talking about how even if you've made mistakes, you can use them to kind of grow, and that's a big thing. Yeah. So now we'll be splitting into breakout rooms, and the two questions on the screen right now are basically like loose guidelines for what you guys will be like talking about. So two major things. Do you think you would be willing to participate in restorative justice if you had been the person wronged or harmed? And is there an environment where restorative justice will not work or be as effective? So these are pretty specific, interesting questions to think about. And guys, I think the biggest thing I can say is just please don't refrain yourselves. Like just say what you're thinking. And it'll be good. Yeah.
Yes, so just stand by. I'm going to open up all the rooms. And yeah, I'm excited for us to reconvene in 15 minutes.
Okay, guys, so I hope you had a good time in your breakout rooms. I hope you had good discussions. So I guess we're just going to go kind of like we're going to share based on like what group we were in. So Who was in group 1, the facilitator, and maybe you could start with the responses of your questions.
I believe Andrew and I were in group 1.
Okay.
Right, Andrew? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we were in a group with Adia, Chloe, and Dina. And so some points that we covered were that we must focus on why someone is perpetrating harm rather than the act of harm they are inflicting on someone else. So someone might have like home problems, family issues, or even like personal emotional issues that they need to get through. And usually them inflicting harm is a cry of help, if anything, because they are going through something in their lives. We cannot take a look at the issues at hand on a surface level because there's so many nuances, layers, and complexities. So this also touches upon like the point of respecting all parties and restorative justice, that we must give the accused a fair trial instead of jumping to conclusions about why they inflicted harm, what they're doing. Punishment makes it worse because, like I stated previously, people who are inflicting harm, like they're going through something, and in punishing them, it puts them in a lower position. And Andrew, do you want to talk about the point you made about assault and like traumatic events?
Right. So going on to question 2, we really thought and we really dived deep into the question of whether or not restorative justice would be valid in a situation where the perpetrator has, caused, almost irrevocable physical or mental harm to a person. So in that case, we kind of came to a conclusion that maybe restorative justice wouldn't be necessarily one of the best tools to use, because coming face to face in a situation like that can be very traumatic for someone. But of course, everyone's different. So if a person, feels mentally strong enough to be able to want to face their perpetrator, and even if not, that's more than okay. It's that sort of fine line between, will restorative justice work, or will law enforcement be a better place for this to be processed? And I think that was where a slight kind of divisiveness came in as to whether or not restorative justice would still be valid in a situation of assault.
I guess, like, in some cases, restorative justice wouldn't work if the person is incapable of having remorse. You have to know who you're dealing with, which is why we decided that like interacting with the person and getting them to open up would be very helpful. If they don't, then like definitely punishment was another thing we were talking about, if it's really effective, because it has to be if they were willing or not. So I guess it really depends on the perpetrator and how far the victim wants to take it.
So if that's everyone who wants to share, that was really interesting, everything that you guys said. So I'm group 2, so I'll just add on to Adia. So what she was saying about how like you have to have remorse, that's also what we were talking about. We were talking about how you have to have a certain level of forgiveness when you enter a restorative justice session. We were talking about the scenario where like if the level of severity is higher, like if somebody killed somebody, it's obviously you're less likely to forgive that person, right? But in a scenario of cheating, it's probably more likely to forgive someone. So I feel like in scenarios that are that intense, maybe restorative justice isn't the best approach, but in scenarios like in the school building or less severe scenarios, it's better. So I'll pass it on to the people that were in my group. I know we talked about some good points.
Yeah, we were also saying how it kind of depends on the person and it depends on like how forgiving you are, but also like, I'm trying to think of like the wording. Sorry, I'm totally blanking right now. Like usually when something first happens, a person is pretty upset or whatever their feelings they have about it. Like in the moment, they're probably not going to forgive the other person, but over time, like the longer it is after the event, usually people are more likely to start forgiving or like start the process of that. So I was actually wondering if usually restorative justice happens right away or if it usually does take time. I'm not really sure what the answer to that actually is.
Do you want me to answer it?
Yes.
Okay. So it really depends on the situation. I would say in a lot of the contexts, that I work in, we try to do it as soon as possible. Now, maybe, students might need, if it's a fight or something, 1 or 2 days to cool off before and reflect before we might begin the process. We also, the first thing we do is always a pre-conference, which is more of a one-on-one individual interview with the facilitator. So it'd be myself or somebody else. And that way they can really kind of learn more about the process, really decide whether or not they want to move forward. And so a lot of times we have at least 1 or 2 days, sometimes a little bit more, between the pre-conference and then the actual circle. Now for more like thinking really serious, like conflicts where maybe, or not conflicts, but crimes where people have, been incarcerated. There's actually this, it's called the Restorative Justice Project. I think Vance Jones, it was on CNN for a while. I think you could still probably access some of the videos, but I would definitely encourage you, if you're interested in restorative justice, check out that film, because they explore restorative justice facilitated for various very serious harms where the person is serving or maybe has served time in jail, or maybe they're still serving time in jail, maybe they are serving their life in jail, but the victim wants to meet with this person. And so it's a really powerful show. So I would definitely encourage that. So for those incidences, I think it could be like, decades later or years later. So it really depends on the situation. That's the best answer I can give.
Okay, thank
you. I'll
you.
Try to find the name to that so I can link it for you all.
Okay, so did anybody else in my group want to say anything? If not, we can move on to the next group.
I'd just like to add that the whole idea of restorative justice, if someone wants to do it or someone doesn't want to do it, with all the advantages and disadvantages, what is more important is to make people aware that such a thing exists, because there are many people who are unaware of it, and colleges and schools or institutions or total institutions, they should really first educate the people about it, and then we can move on to whether to apply it or not. That's all.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
So for group, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, unfortunately, a lot of times there's institutions, schools, whatever, that don't have a restorative justice or anyone that can facilitate, or any resources. So that's something that's really growing, I think, in the country. But a lot of places just don't have access to restorative justice process or restorative justice resources.
I guess adding on to that, I feel like in a way it's good that we're like coming to these types of talks and such to learn about restorative justice now, because I know you were saying you learned in college, and it's so nice to be privileged enough to like learn about that now and take action now and just be more aware of it and bring it to our schools.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Can't agree more.
So I think, do you know how we are on time?
So yeah, we're a little bit over time, but that's fine. Maybe we can combine when everyone is like sharing their group takeaways. If you happen to have any questions, and Sarah, like, if anyone has a takeaway that you want to comment on, feel free to, jump in and add on to what they're saying.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, we can just sort of combine Q&A and the discussion right now as we're going. So for group 3, we had the privilege of talking with Sarah, which was really nice. And we really went into depth on like the different perspectives. Like if you were the person that was harmed, you would really want an environment where you trust that the other person is going to be honest about what they're saying, and that they're going to take responsibility, and that this space in itself is like healthy. And that if you were one that did the harm, then you would also want to be able to learn about yourself and hold yourself accountable. And in general, like you would just need such a mutually respecting environment that I think like then people would participate in. And like we personally said we would if it was like that. And then also for if it wouldn't work, we were saying that you would really just need honesty and willingness. And if you don't have those things, and also if it's just something that is, I think like other people were saying, if it's such an intense crime that happened, sometimes you just can't discuss things out. But yeah, if there's anything else, I think, so we had like Sehi, Nora, Rachel, and Nadine. If you guys want to add anything on.
Yeah, so our group, we touched on a lot of the topics that have already been covered, and we began to relate restorative justice and its applications to a lot of the conversations that are happening today. And even in the context of that, Mimi mentioned this earlier about recognizing why someone may have committed a crime and even increasing empathy on both sides, as well as beginning to, recognize the systems in place and think about, like, are there ways to alter the larger system so crime is reduced as a whole? And, also thinking about the international applications of restorative justice and communities that have had a history of, feuds and high conflicts, and how restorative justice has allowed communities to reset those contracts. And oftentimes those conflicts can just be over very small things, like you killed my cow, but then you stole 3 of mine, things that are really small, but can lead to a lot of violence, and how restorative justice is really powerful. And then we were also, I'll open it up to my group for them to contribute, but we also did discuss some of the, avenues that we feel would be less productive, and what those circumstances would look like, and things like that. So anyone else from my group who wants to discuss anything, I'm going to open it up to you.
So I was part of group 4. We also talked about how the severity of the situation has a lot to do with how strong or how, efficient restorative justice would be. And we were talking about how, in the school area, it is very important, and especially when it comes to mental health, since in high school, it's something that's very reoccurring. But on larger levels, such as murder, I think it's a little harder to go with, especially since both sides are probably not willing to talk about it, and it's extremely sensitive.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I was also in group 4. And another thing we talked about was how prison systems in other countries, maybe European countries, they're more focused on healing instead of punishment, and also more focused on restorative justice and discussion between maybe prison inmates and the victims of the crimes. So we thought that maybe thinking about it on a larger scale like that, it could also be beneficial.
Okay, so one thing that we talked about was how restorative justice can be most effective when it is approached with the audience in mind. So especially in school systems, we talked about how restorative justice in a situation for elementary schoolers maybe might be approached completely differently in a situation for high schoolers, and how the effectiveness of the restorative justice itself is highly dependent on how it's approached with the audience in mind, because you just know that younger kids respond to certain situations completely different than older kids, and how maturity levels can also into how effective the restorative justice is.
Yeah. Wait, that was I would just say that was a point that I had honestly not thought about, because I feel we tend to think of this as this overarching umbrella that can kind of one thing fits all, but that's really not the way it works. It has to be so personalized. So I guess another big thing that we talked about was just to play devil's advocate here. I think that a big thing that you have to think of is if you're the victim and you feel someone who really negatively impacted you is being let off easy, and I'm not necessarily saying that's what's happening, but that might be what it feels like. I think that's a pretty big deal. And how that person might react, that's something that I think needs to be factored in, and I don't know too much about, but is definitely something to think about. How can you expect someone to empathize with someone when they feel they've been personally wronged or affected? So I guess that's just something I would love to hear, more from Sarah about at a later point too. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And yeah, there's so many angles which I could use to answer the question, so I'm probably not going to touch on every angle. But I think that one thing to really consider is, how much voice or what your needs what your needs are. Say you're someone who has been impacted or wronged. And a lot of times, like I ask people, you know, who might be hesitant to participate, you know, do you feel like another opportunity, or, you know, if this, say it's like actually like a really serious incident, and do you feel like you would have like more of a voice, like if it went to, you know, say just the criminal justice process or something like that? And oftentimes, like, there's a lot of legalities. So, you know, for serious incidences, like, it would go automatically to, you know, kind of be dealt with in that situation. But, you know, sometimes for certain incidences, we might have, or I've seen people, you know, say, oh, you know, well, I want to, you know, press charges, or, you know, do, you know, follow up in this way. And of course, like, you know, everyone has a right to due process. But I think what I say restorative justice might be able to offer that you might not be able to offer if it goes through a traditional process is really a voice in determining the outcome. And yeah, and of course, again, it's a very personal decision that people have to make, whether or not they want to participate or whether or not they want to pursue another option. And who's to say that, you know, what is right for that individual? So it's not us, you know, trying to convince them, but to really share, you know, this is some things that restorative justice can offer. If you're really thinking about what your needs are, or what you want to see come out of this process, like maybe this is something that restorative justice could offer more than, you know, going a traditional route. And again, oftentimes there's a lot of other things that other factors to consider. So every situation is so different, so complex. But that's just something that I have used in the past when kind of just explaining what restorative justice is and what it can offer someone who has been harmed. I hope that answers it. These are really good questions, by the way, like phenomenal questions. You could definitely like use this question to develop a whole like hour-long discussion.
And Sarah, I know like many of our participants are coming from Fairfax County, and I know you have an initiative that maybe everyone can take part in. So if you want to spend some time, just a few minutes to go over that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not going to talk too much in detail about the initiative because it's still being approved through, you know, my manager and, you know, different departments, but there's a potential opportunity to kind of be trained to facilitate some listening circles. So kind of under the umbrella of restorative justice is also something called restorative practices. Restorative practices are, they utilize like the principles of restorative justice, but they're not so much used to necessarily address like a specific incident of harm, but more so used to build community, you know, prevent harm from occurring, allow people to really connect with one another. So it's still like very much facilitated in a circle format with a talking piece, same as in restorative justice. And of course, now that, you know, we're all virtual, it also looks a little different, but essentially it's, you know, everyone take a turn to share. There's a facilitator that asks questions, but there's an opportunity to potentially to train a group of students to lead dialogues in their schools. So if you are interested in being involved in that, definitely, I would say maybe go through the lead piece leadership. So like maybe email the lead piece, and then because I'm working with Hadara and those of you on the lead piece leadership organization. So let us know if you are interested, because we will be looking for students who want to get trained in being a restorative practices facilitator. And in that, we'll be going through a lot of this, again, the kind of philosophy, the principles of restorative justice. It'll be a great opportunity if you want to get involved in this work.
Sarah, thank you so much.